Hi and welcome to the video of the build of my Apocalypse bike. We were lucky enough to go to the Bespoked handmade bike show, and one of the main events was the Apocalypse build-off between or for bike builders, frame builders and shops that also took part. There were some rules created, loose rules occasionally looked at. Of what the bike should be, what it should have, what it should carry, all that sort of stuff. And then we got into a design process, which for me was thinking about previous builds and what I might want to include, levels of tall and fat and cargo and anything else you could imagine. And try and get an idea in my head of what I thought the Apocalypse bike would be. There was a document we were meant to produce. This was mine, that you'll see a bit more of later. So into the design process, as it were. For me, I kind of lay stuff out on the grass, in this case, to see what I want to do, get a rough idea. The first bits were fairly obvious for me. I took what was an old fat bike, my son's old fat bike, and that was going to be kind of the main frame. So then it started cutting, and kind of it was going to have a tall bike element to it as well. So this frame was going to sit on top as my kind of main seating position. So needed to kind of remove the down tube first off to lay out where the front of the bike was going to be and the height of that, the length of that. Fortunately, the frame basically fitted me quite well as a size, so I didn't have to sort of change the size of it at all. It was just for layout. So this is the final stages of angle grinding and sawing and finally getting the down tube out of the way. Then there was a bit of tidy up. Always left with the ends of the tubes when you can't angle grind them off, so fair amount of time is always spent grinding that back, getting it all nice and smooth and ready for welding if you're going to be welding in that area. And then for the down tube, a mitre, because it was going to get put back onto the bottom bracket just at a different angle, so I tend to use the angle grinder and grinding disc to create the initial joint and then finish that up with a hand file. Usually with a bit of practice you can make this pretty close pretty quickly, certainly quicker than setting up in a machine and doing it that way. So there's lots of backwards and forwards and trying to check the fit and make sure it is the right shape and also square with the orientation of the tubes that you want. Not that it overly mattered too much on this one, other than wanting the bottle bosses sticking upwards in the right plane. So once the down tube is out of the way, then you kind of lay it out again and get a better idea for what you're doing. So the down tube would say go on the bottom bracket again, but at a lower angle, and then quickly break into the cardboard model. So to try and get a picture, obviously you can try and do this in CAD or something, computer aided or cardboard aided as the case may be, but this gives a pretty good way of roughing out a frame design in its loosest terms, so that you can kind of cut tubes and mitre stuff up, and then ultimately lie it back on the picture and see that it aligns with the original ideas. So you can just about tell from this, so the fat bike frame at the top, the lowered down tube, so extend the head tube down. See, the front wheel is off to the left in this case, so it's going to have a cargo rack at the front and linked steering, sort of Omnium style-y. And then kind of thinking about what bracing would need to be there, both in the main frame and the front. Obviously there's going to be another head tube at the front to hold the steerer of the yellow fork in this case. So try and get some triangulation in the front. So in my case, a couple of tubes at the front, and also look at how that kind of plays back to the back wheel and its location. It might not look like it, but the wheels are placed at height, So they are, that sets obviously the axle heights and then the bottom bracket height and the orientation of the main parts of the frame. Was trying to work out what to do with the back, particularly the seat stays. At this point, the back will get cut off and reoriented. It's easy to use the chain stays in this kind of design and just kind of move them around so that they are where the axle is, the dropouts where the axle is, and then basically join them back onto the down tube with additional tubes in the middle. But you get some choices about how to deal with the seat stays, basically whether to extend them from where they are and kind of drop them around to the dropout. It's got a disc mount on the dropout, so it's handy to use that as well. Take that down when you take the dropouts down. So I chose to drop the whole at back end down in a minute or two. It was also going to have a cargo rack underneath, so needed a way of connecting that up to the main frame, both at the front and the back, and then have a platform underneath. Got to think about not whacking it with your feet when you're trying to get on and off, and the size and shape of that. I did start with that curve there, thinking I'd do a curve section into the cargo area, which I later decided not to do, basically because it was the way I was thinking of doing it with two tubes to the corners of the rack would start interfering with the steering linkage, and it all started getting a bit complicated. So gave that one up, and this was being done. I started this sort of 2 weeks before the show, so didn't have too much time because this was done in evenings and whatnot. Yeah, at some points had to make it simple. It was an interesting balance of how confident am I of finishing something that's going to be rideable for the event, and trying to include the ever-increasing long list of features. So I couldn't help but think about and try and knock off all of the points in the spec of what the bike should be. So this was playing with the where the seat stays were going to be. And basically, I could have had a big tube running up there from where the current seat stays get to the seat tube was one idea, which we moved away from. Yeah, if it was just going to be this frame, then probably try and make the back quite simple, and sort of a normal set of two seat stays, two chain stays, with a bit of linkage. Lengthening it out gave some room in the middle. I'd got this butane color gas thing from an auto jumble the week before as the cooking method that I was trying to fit in somewhere where it would fit nicely. Strange being a square thing, it didn't want to fit shape and size wise very well, so we ended up not using it in the end. So that's what that was all about. And then this was back onto the front and just looking at the angle of the head tube, and then where the joints to the front head tube would be. So this was preparing the bottom bracket. Again, it had the residue of the tubes that were there before, but just taking those back to create a smooth surface for brazing. At this time, this had a 120mm bottom bracket on it, and I really didn't want to use it. I didn't have any cranks that were, well, I had the original cranks off this bike, but it was such a horrible Q angle. It was, I didn't really want to use it, so I was looking at either cutting that bottom bracket down, was the initial idea, but it had some race face bottom bracket in with it, needs a special tool to get it out, and I didn't have one, so we had a slight change of heart. This was another frame that was just lying around, really crappy old Apollo, but it had some solid old pipes that would be good enough to be the front section in front of the the rear head tube, if that's a thing, in between the two head tubes, to create the front sort of triangle like that between the two head tubes. And the top one wants to be pretty much horizontal so that it can align with any rack that's going to go on top of there. So this was the decision about cutting off the seat stays, and at some point around here I realised it wasn't going to fit in the car, so decided to make it folding. So that arrangement that just flashed through was cutting through the seat tube to so that it can clamp onto the seat tube, and that would be one of the brakes in the frame, much like a Ritchie breakaway frame has. And so the final decision with the bottom bracket, because I couldn't get the cups out, was to cut the bottom bracket off and put a normal 100mm fat bike one on, which was, it's quickish and easy to do. That shows it with the extra head tube welded on as well, and the bottom bracket, and that piece on the left is the other joiner for the frame separation. It got a bit crazy in the jig. Obviously this is quite big and it has some weird angles and just couldn't fit it in, so ultimately we ended up outside on the very homemade jig. This is the seat stays, I think, chain stays rather, and the linkage tubes between it and the and the bottom bracket and the chain stays. And this was how some of the getting this to set somewhere so I could weld it was getting a little challenging, because it was getting quite long at this point. But you can kind of see the layout of the frame there with the front head tube on and then the wheels in. This was the first time the wheels went in, and checking that. And it also got quite challenging to fit in the shed. That was the door, and it took up pretty much the whole space. And at the end of every day there was a lot of junk everywhere. It was getting kind of messier and messier as the days went by. Then I was going to fit a cargo rack to the front, so this was some of the mountings for that. It's quite easy to use square tubing for this. It looks a bit agricultural, but it makes, when you're in a hurry, and it's quite thick tubing, it's quite rigid, so it makes setting this stuff up and getting it flat and straight a bit easier than trying to mitre round tubes into those corners and spaces and getting the tube horizontal in there. My take on this, which is the same as my cargo bike, is to use quick release axles, so normal front axles, and a quick release to hold the rack on, so I can both take the rack off and make the bike smaller and swap between different types of rack. So I've got some others that I use on my cargo bike, which is what's going on here. So the small tube in the middle of the square tube is the thing the axle goes through and the QR goes through to hold the rack on. So this is brass brazing, which is how I tend to weld frames up. You can see it on the joints there, and this is the process just starting on this tube to tack it in place, which obviously then burns a whole load of paint off. Check if it's flat. That is a digital level, and equally flat and vertical, horizontal and vertical. Heating it and brazing it will easily pull it out of straight, so it's good to get some good tacks on there before going sideways. So that's what that is doing, and just a bit of footage, or excellent photography with my hand right in the way, of brazing that on. I did try and cut out a lot of the work and leave bits in, all of the brazing and all of those tubes you didn't get to see, and you don't get to see this one either. But it takes a minute or two, and some burning paint to connect that on. And then again, same thing at the top, but gives you, a rough idea of how long doing a bit of brazing takes, and this video would have been a lot longer if I had left all of this stuff in. So that's that tube finished, and there's a similar one on the front, has sort of 2 axles holding it in. Did want to put a couple of curved tubes in there, so this is a tube roller and a plain gauge 28.6mm tube, which takes a bit of muscling through this thing. You increase the amount of pressure in it and curvature it does each time it goes through, so you can get more and more curve into it. This is not butted tubing because that really doesn't respond well to tube rollers. You can get a little bend in them, but typically they're very thin as well, so they don't really want to bend far. And for ease of the workshop, I don't have this bolted down, which makes it even trickier to tighten up and rotate the tube through. Try not to have the tube still when you're increasing the pressure of it, otherwise it leaves little dents in there. So trying to tension it and turn it at the same time. It was a quick curve test against the wheel to see if it was getting close to looking like it would suit the curvature, which it was getting there. But yeah, it was pretty hard work getting this through there. And then we can cut this tube down and use it in a couple of places. The main one was at the back to be in front of the rear wheel and create both the linkage between the seat stays and the chain stays like that, and be the bottom tube going round to the rack, which was again those holes in this one to bolt that on. And then this is making the steerer tube, jumping around a little bit, apologies about that. So this is the steerer tube, where it is made out of motorsport components basically, for track rod ends and steering links. And I also decided I'd make some handlebars for it. These have adjustable ends, so you can set whatever angle you want, but it made it quite handy to fold the bars so I could fit the thing in the car a bit easier. So yeah, it can do both adjustable angles and make the thing a bit smaller. And whilst I was there, I thought I would do a quick custom stem with some of the leftovers of the bars, which seemed like a good idea at the time. Time was getting a little tight at this point. I forget where we were, but we're probably 3 or 4 days before we have to be finished. So as always, you kind of wait to see how much time you've got and see how much you can fit in and balance the end date. And there's always a risk that the last bit gets a bit late and you haven't ridden it before you take it away. Now, who would do that? Not me, obviously. So I came up with a design, but it makes it incredibly difficult to tension the handlebar grip of the stem on the steerer. But because it's not got the forks on the steerer where this goes, then there's a lot less force going through it. But yeah, it does make it a little challenging to tighten it up, because the twin bar tubes don't want to bend sideways to let it clamp. So you're getting that a bit warm to get the brass in there. Can be there's quite a bit of material in places. The boss on the top is also different thicknesses. One end takes the bolt and one takes the sort of head of the bolt, which makes it a lot thinner. So you can see it glowing nice and red now, and the other end's quite relatively thick. So yeah, it takes a little bit more heat. This is just trying to flow the brass around the end, make it all nice and smooth looking. down to the other end, which if you start on the thin end, the fat end has got a bit hot by the time you get there, so it doesn't take quite as long to warm up. Before anybody asks, yes, that's my fireproof jumper. It was quite warm these evenings, so and it was all getting a bit of a rush at this point. So on purpose wanted to leave this looking open-ended and apocalyptic, like it was done in a hurry, as if an apocalypse was happening, which was wholly true, and that's how they ended up on the bike at the end with the friction shifter. That was also worth points for the scoring system, and that was the other part of the curve of the tube that triangulated the top frame and got across the join that was in the head tube, and this was on the front of that join. So we had a spanner, made in England spanner, that did a suitable job of giving us a head badge and helping support that joint. And then this was building the rack for the bottom. So I wanted it to be removable to make it easier, but also structural, so it held or supported the frame. There's obviously quite a big set of forces going through that end to end when the frame is separatable in the middle. So this helped with all of that, and suitably challenging, trying to hold it straight and get that both parallel and horizontal at the same time. So measure twice, cut 3 times, and then at the back we had a couple of old chainstays from a repair job that had broken its chainstays, so cut the ends off. They didn't need to be full length, so could cut the damage out and then use those to kind of triangulate the back of the rack into that curved tube that was coming down in front of the rear wheel. That should help give it a little bit of structure, and also meant it didn't have sharp corners, because to get on a tall bike you're kind of hopping along by the side of that, and that would doubtless get you in the ankles. So the rush was on now, hence why not bothering to take the rear wheel out, and it was all set up like this, so it's pretty impossible to get the rear wheel out and hold this straight when you're on your own and using a car jack to hold it up. So just very careful not to let the heat go backwards into that tyre. So just tack those chainstays on. They're held on with welder's magnets to allow that just to be held at all. And then on that rack there was enough space. You had to think of pedal clearance for one thing, so you could have a sort of low down basket that could hold whatever. And you see at the front the vertical yellow tube, which was another piece of that Apollo frame, and it's got a kind of bolt through clamp at the front to separate that. But it allows, because this is the rear tube sleeves inside itself, so the way that bolt runs at the front, sort of front to back of the bike, enables you to kind of rotate and swivel the rack in and raise it up into the frame at the back. You can just see there at the top left, whilst and then just attach it at the front, because it will swing around and the mount will be in the right place if you're lucky. Yeah, welding next to a propane tank. Didn't notice at the time, but probably shouldn't do that. But it was only a quick tack, honest. And another quick tack, and probably another quick tack. And again, trying not to set fire to that rear tyre. That could have been quite a bang. So that's it with the rack in, and makes it darn sight easier to work on because it sits on its rack. And then in my list of great ideas, I really wanted to make it two-wheel drive. I think mud will be the apocalyptic nightmare, as it is every other day. So I had an old Marion swing arm kicking about, and we cut it in half, used the back bit at the back, the front bit at the front, stuck some mounts on the seat stays, which was one reason for leaving the seat stays in a slightly funny shape. So they've got a hump on the back of them, so that I could put the mounts on for this and be able to have a shock mount on that cross tube in fact. So this was the parts cut off the Marion swing arm and then moved inboard. Obviously they're a lot further outboard than a normal 2-inch old 26er, and then the front mount for the shock on the rear or seat stays, and a bit of bracing just to hold it all in place. It ended up with a few more bracing tubes, kind of just to help out the swing arm a bit. It was quite long in the end, and and then this was the kind of first, I think, finished shot of it all together. So the swing arm with a couple of extra brace tubes chucked in, the mounts on the seat stays, on that curved tubing, and a nice Fox shop which we picked up for a £5 at an auto jumble, and then the frontage with the steering link in place and the front tubes and the bars and everything. So I think this was a day before we left, I think, and basically the first time that it had been put together with the rack in the bottom. We did link up the two rear wheels. One of the other things that needed as part of the rules was some security. So we wanted to create some apocalyptic security and anti-theft, bit of a threatening warning. So picked up this very orange looking prosthetic hand and some fake blood to ward off other people from attempting to steal it. It was quite tricky to. It's full of foam, so you drilled into it and it just kind of bound up in the drill bit. But yeah, made quite a nice mess and something pretty grim. And this was our kind of warning sticker for "Thou shalt not steal my bike," or "Bad juju," etc. To get time just to knock out a little bag for it to hold some stuff into that top curvy tube section. And this was it all together. And at this point, so this was the test ride. So from here up to that wall was about as far as it went. This was the night before packing, and this was the morning of packing, the day we were leaving, with the folded handlebars. And I was really surprised that it fitted in so easily. It basically filled up half the back of the car, and then we've got two show bikes and all the other stuff in there. And this was the document of it. So I needed to create a build manual, and given that I'd drawn all over this bit of cardboard, it made a perfect build manual, and was 1-to-1 in size. So just added some notes, and then this was up in Manchester in the Victoria Baths. So the Apocalypse bikes were shown in the top floor, so this was where we sort of built it up with a few of the accessories and stuff that we'd thrown together. Getting the Haribo horse back, which was the most important. So there was a crit race in the car park, so I felt the need to test ride. There's quite a big drop to the right, which is why you see me hovering to the left in the bars. And so that was its test ride. And there were some photos, great photos taken by Nic from bikepacking.com. Thank you very much. And then out on the course, various people taking photos. We'd taken it down to 2 wheels because it really didn't want to turn around a car park pretty quickly through cones and stuff. And I think this is my favourite photo from the day, taken by Prolly from The Radavist, with Tullen from Sentient riding it, and the look on his face just says a picture. So that was the build. Thanks very much for watching. I hope it's of interest. Anybody has questions, comments, why do it, why not do it, all those things, throw them in the comments below, and probably do a walkover video as well of the bike with some of the features. And Russ from Pathless Pedaled video YouTube channel was there and did a review of this and some of the other Apocalypse bikes. It's worth a watch. We'll put the link in the description below. So thanks very much.